Hey Dungeons & Dragons community, I love D&D, and 5th is my favorite edition by far, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, and I think we all agree that a couple adjustments could make things even better. I've done a series of those adjustments that I'm going to be providing to everyone at no cost. Feel free to download, share, and use them. In these videos, I'll be explaining how these adjustments work and why I made any decisions for changes I made. Today, I'm going to go through my changes to the Sorcerer. As always, a link to the document is in the video description for your convenience, and that document contains a link back to this video. So today I present the Sorcerer, the Treantmonk Variant. So when it comes to Sorcerers, I don't think they are an unplayable class. I don't think they're a terrible class. I do think they're probably below average. But the thing I get told the most is, why on earth would I play a Sorcerer when I could play a Wizard instead? And the answer to that is usually Metamagic, because of course a sorcerer knows a lot less spells than a wizard, but they are able to specialize in spells through Metamagic. But the thing is although the sorcerer can specialize in spells through Metamagic, wizards have ways of specializing in spells too. I mean, a sorcerer can twin a spell, but then again an enchanter can twin a spell as well. A sorcerer can make a saving throw more difficult for a spell, but then again, a diviner can actually change your saving throw for a spell. A sorcerer can have their allies automatically make a saving throw against a spell they cast, but then again, an evoker can have the allies not only make their saving throw against a spell they cast, but also, if that spell would normally deliver half damage if they make their saving throw, they would take no damage instead. So when it comes to the complaints about the sorcerer, a lot of them are actually pretty valid. And I think the main problem is that sorcerers automatically and reasonably get compared to wizards, because wizards have a similar spell list and a similar feel to them. And when it comes to the things that the sorcerers are good at, wizards are often good at those things as well. So when it comes to fixing the sorcerer, what I often get told is, maybe you should look at increasing the spells known, because of course a wizard knows more spells than a sorcerer, and you can narrow that gap by giving sorcerers more spells known. Or maybe we should give them ritual casting, so then maybe they can cast spells without using spell slots like a wizard can. But when I went into thinking about how to fix the sorcerer, I decided that the fix isn't making the sorcerer more like the wizard. If you want to play a wizard, you can just play a wizard. What I want to do here is I wanted to make the sorcerer more different than the wizard. I think that is the solution. What we want to have is a sorcerer who is unlike any other class. That's hard to compare to the wizard because it's good at such different things than the wizard. So then, even though they have similar spell lists, the class abilities are so different, and the feel of them is so different, and the way they play is so different, and their strengths are so different, that there is perfect reason to play a sorcerer because you want to access those strengths, not because you think the sorcerer is more powerful than a wizard. So that's how I approach this variant. The Treantmonk variant for the sorcerer is a sorcerer that is going to feel like no other class in the game, and it's going to be very difficult for you to compare it to other spell casters. So, let's get started. So this is the Sorcerer, the Treantmonk variant, and we're also going to go over the two sorceress origins that are in the player's handbook, the Draconic Sorcerer and the Wild Magic Sorcerer. So my goal here again was to make the sorcerer different from a wizard, make it different from a bard. I didn't want to make it more like them. I don't think that is the solution to the sorcerer. I don't think giving the sorcerer a bunch more spells known so that they feel more like playing a bard or they feel more like playing a wizard is the answer. What I wanted to do is make sure the sorcerer had things that make you want to play a sorcerer rather than make it feel like you're playing a wizard. So I want to talk a little bit about the flavor, because the flavor is really what inspired these changes. A sorcerer is unlike a wizard in that they're not studying their magic. Their magic is inborn. The idea is that the sorcerer maybe has some kind of origin, like maybe they had a draconic ancestor. or they had an elemental ancestor, or maybe they had some kind of experience where they had some kind of contact with some great magical energy and it imbued them somehow. But one way or the other, magic is supposed to be in the sorcerer's blood. It's not something they studied to learn. They're not going through books and figuring out how to cast spells. Those spells come from within. That's why the sorcerer is a charisma-based caster, is because they are accessing the force of their own self in order to manifest spells. So that really became the inspiration for the changes that I made to this class. So first we get into class features, and almost nothing has changed. Hit points remain the same. Proficiencies remain exactly the same. The only difference is that in the equipment list, you no longer get an arcane focus or a spell component pouch. And the reason you don't get them is because you're no longer going to need them. So then we get into spell casting, and the basic rules for spell casting remain the same. The sorcerer is going to get the same number of spells known that they had in the player's handbook. Yes, that's not very many spells known. But what we're going to do is we're going to make the sorcerer really good with those spells. They're going to get the same number of cantrips, the same number of spell slots, and those spells are cast mostly in the same way. As with before, charisma is going to be the ability score you need to cast your spells. The first major change of the Treantmonk Variant Sorcerer compared to the Player's Handbook Sorcerer is in the way that they interact with material components. And this is where we get our first class ability that is unique to this variant, eschew materials. Now this has existed in previous editions, and it was often associated with sorcerers, though it was usually something like a feat. But I've made it a class ability for sorcerers now, so every sorcerer has eschew materials now. And the way it works is this: a sorcerer does not require material components for their sorcerer spells. If you cast a sorcerer spell with an M component, you do not need to provide that component. Now, some components are free and some components are expensive. And when you have an expensive component, some of the time those components are expended, and other times you can use the same component over and over again. So depending which of those three is the case, it always works differently for a sorcerer. If the material component costs nothing, that component is simply ignored. You don't need a focus, you don't need a component pouch. You can cast a spell without the M component and without doing anything additional. But if you cast a sorcerer spell that would otherwise have a costly component, it requires more focus. To cast such a spell, you must use your bonus action to prepare yourself. When you do so, you may cast a spell or begin casting a spell which would otherwise have a costly component later in the same turn. If the spell requires a bonus action to cast, you may begin casting it on your following turn. So if it has a component that has a cost to it but you don't expend that component, then all you need to do is use a bonus action to prepare that spell, and then you can still ignore that material component. Now you must begin casting that spell in the same turn you expended the bonus action, unless the spell you're casting also requires a bonus action. Then you have to do it on the following round, because of course you can't do more than one bonus action in a round. Now I'll mention that the current Player's Handbook Sorcerer has no bonus action spells that have costly material components, but if something comes up later that does, then that's how it would work. So what about components that are consumed and have a cost? Well, if you cast a sorcerer spell which would otherwise consume a costly component, it is especially difficult for a sorcerer. When you cast such a spell, in addition to using your bonus action to prepare, you take 1d6 necrotic damage immediately after the spell takes effect. If the component would have a cost over 50 gold pieces, you also suffer a level of exhaustion. If the cost of the component is over 100 gold pieces, the sorcerer may not eschew the material component, but in this case they must provide the component to cast the spell. So this is the only case where a sorcerer is even capable of using a material component, is if it consumes a costly component that has a value of over 100 gold pieces. And that is not going to include any of the sorcerer spells in the Player's Handbook, but if we look at some other source books, sorcerers can access other spell lists, and then we might have some spells where that is the case. But the highest cost of a component that is consumed within the Player's Handbook on the sorcerer spell list is 100 gold pieces. If the sorcerer chooses to cast that spell, by the way is Stone Skin, if they choose to cast that spell, they would need to use their bonus action in addition to their action for casting the spell, and they would take 1d6 necrotic damage and they would take 1 level of exhaustion. So it's not easy to do, but they don't need to provide the component. So for example, if you're a 7th level sorcerer and you cast Teleportation Circle as a sorcerer spell, which would normally require a 50 gold piece component, which the spell consumes, instead you must use your bonus action to prepare the spell and receive 1d6 necrotic damage after the spell takes effect. Because the component cost was not over 50 gold pieces, you do not suffer a level of exhaustion. Now the obvious question would be, what if the damage actually was to incapacitate the sorcerer? Then does the spell still go off? It does. The spell will still go off, but then the sorcerer suffers the effects of that damage after the completion of this spell. So if that spell requires concentration and they take damage, they may have to make a concentration save. Or if that spell requires concentration and they fall unconscious, they're going to lose concentration automatically. As usual, at first level, you're going to choose your sorceress origin, and the choices that we're going to talk about with this document are the ones in the player's handbook, the Draconic bloodline, and the wild magic sorcerer. As it happens, I think those are the 2 sorceress origins that needed the most work. Then we get another unique sorcerer ability, and this one I think is very important to the balancing of the sorcerer and the making of the sorcerer unique as a spellcasting class. The strength of your bloodline means that magic flows through your veins. As a bonus action, you can prepare to cast a sorcerer spell that you know of up to 5th level without expending a spell slot. When you do so, you take 1d6 necrotic damage per level of the spell you are preparing to cast. This damage may not be resisted or reduced in any way. This ability only works with spells that have a 1 action or higher casting time. So just mechanically, in this case you're taking the damage before the spell is cast, so it's not going to affect anything like concentration saves. But if that damage was to incapacitate you and make you unconscious, then the spell isn't going to go off, obviously. But what this does is, sorcerers had a problem at low levels. Once you get to those 3rd level spells and higher, the power of those spells brought the sorcerer up back in line where they should be, and they started to feel more in line with the other classes. But at low levels, unlike other spellcasters, they didn't have any ritual spells, they didn't have a lot of class abilities, and so a sorcerer really kind of felt left behind at those levels. But Magical Blood really changes that, because it allows you to cast more spells than any other class in the game. I'll say that again, it allows you to cast more spells than any other class in the game. So although the wizard remains the master of versatility, the sorcerer is now the master of frequency. So now the sorcerer has something that separates them from every other casting class in the game in a significant fashion. Then we get into Font of Magic. We get sorcery points as normal at 2nd level. We get flexible casting as normal at 2nd level, so we have a way we can even get more spell slots if we want, or we can convert our spell slots into more sorcery points. Of course, Magical Blood may even increase our ability to do either of those things. We get a little bit more options with our sorcerer. Then we get into Metamagic with our 3rd level. Just as we did in the player's handbook, we choose the same number of selections at the same levels. The only thing that's changed is a couple of these metamagics I've made slight alterations to. Careful Spell is unchanged from the player's handbook. It allows you to have your allies automatically make their saving throws on a spell you cast. Keep in mind that if that spell does half damage to creatures that make their saving throw, that your allies will still take that half damage. Distance Spell remains almost the same as the player's handbook. So the player's handbook, when you cast a spell that has a range of 5 feet or greater, you can spend 1 sorcery point to double the range of the spell. And when you cast a spell that has a range of touch, you can spend 1 sorcery point to make the range of the spell 30 feet. All that's been added, just a small bonus. If you cast a spell that includes a teleport, you may spend 1 sorcery point to have the maximum range of the teleportation doubled. Because teleportation spells are not ranged spells. They tend to have a target of self, or you target the person who's being teleported. So now what you can do is you can spend a sorcery point to change the range of that teleport that's going to be found in this spell description. Then we get to Empowered Spell, which remains unchanged from the player's handbook. This basically allows you, when you cast a spell that has numeric effects, you can alter some dice rolls. And the thing about Empowered Spell that's nice is you can use it on top of other metamagic. So Empowered Spell was always okay and so I didn't see a need to change it. Now, Extend Spell is one I thought could use a boost, because what Extend Spell did in the player's handbook is you would spend a sorcery point, and then it would increase the duration of a spell that had a minute duration or longer to double its duration. But the problem is that often what would happen is you'd cast a spell with a duration of 1 minute, and you would extend it to 2 minutes, and it would still likely last an entire combat, and it would still likely not last until the beginning of your next combat. Or then you would cast a spell with a 10-minute duration, and you would use your extend spell with that, and then what would happen is it would tend to last until your next short rest, but not past your next short rest, whether you used extend spell or not. And so on and so forth. And this is part of the reason why the player's handbook doesn't have spells with 2-minute durations or 20-minute durations. They tend to go by 1 minute, 10 minutes, 1 hour, 8 hours, or 24 hours. So now what extend spell does is it bumps you up to the next category of duration. So if you cast a spell with a duration of 1 minute, it's now extended to 10 minutes. If the duration of the spell is 10 minutes, it's bumped up to 1 hour. If it normally had a duration of 1 hour, it's bumped up to 8 hours. And if it normally had a duration of 8 hours, it's bumped up to 24 hours. Extend spell cannot extend the duration of a spell to over 24 hours. Heightened spell remains the same as the player's handbook. In the player's handbook, of course, you use heightened spell to give a target disadvantage on a saving throw. I just kept it the same. Quicken spell, again, going to remain the same as the player's handbook. You can use your sorcery points to make a 1-action casting spell into a bonus action casting spell. Now, subtle spell, technically speaking, is the same. When you cast a spell, you can spend 1 sorcery point to cast it without using any somatic or verbal components. The difference is that now you don't have to use material components either, so now it's truly a subtle spell. Don't know why the subtle spell Metamagic didn't allow you to avoid the material component before, but now, of course, you don't have to use a material component when you cast a spell and you're a sorcerer. So now when you use the subtle spell Metamagic, it truly is a subtle spell because it's going to require no components at all. And then Twin Spell I kept the same. Twin Spell was always a really strong Metamagic, so it definitely didn't need a bump up, and I didn't want to nerf anything. So Twin Spell is going to remain the same as it was in the player's handbook. Ability score improvements will occur at the same levels they did in the player's handbook. The last thing I did do is I bumped up the Capstone. So Sorceress Restoration. In the player's handbook, once you reach 20th level as a sorcerer, when you take a short rest, you would recover 4 sorcery points. But now with the Capstone, at 20th level, you regain all expended sorcery points whenever you finish a short rest. And when you roll for initiative and you have no sorcery points remaining, you regain 1 sorcery point. So this now gives the sorcerer a reason to look forward to 20th level. So then if they're not going to bother taking any multiclassing, they're just going to be a straight sorcerer, they're going to get a significant Capstone at 20th level. So that's the sorcerer. So the main things I've done here is I have not improved spells known. I considered being able to use sorcery points to cast spells that weren't on your spell list or that weren't spells known for you. But again, I figured that just increases versatility. And then we're just treading on the feet of the wizard. What I wanted to do was make the sorcerer powerful, but not like a wizard. I wanted to make them powerful in their own way. And so what we've done is we've given them the ability to avoid material components, which no other class in the game can do. And we've given them the ability to cast more spells than any other class in the game can cast. And then we've done a little bit of bumping of some Metamagic and the Capstone ability. But those 2 things are kind of the main changes to the sorcerer. I think both those things fit with the idea of a sorcerer that gets their magic from within rather than through studying books. I mean, how does a sorcerer even find out what the material components for spells even are? Are they reading books to find that out or learning from somebody else? I thought a sorcerer's power came from within. So how do they know they need a copper piece to cast that spell? Doesn't make sense. Makes far more sense that if a spell requires more components and more expensive components, it's just harder to cast rather than requiring those components. And the only exceptions really are going to be if we go into other source books where we can get into spells that have really costly material components that are consumed, like things like resurrection spells. We simply can't have the sorcerer casting things like resurrection without requiring any components, because that changes the nature of the game. So if we get into those kinds of spells, then the sorcerer, you can come up with a reason, but they're going to know they're going to need the components for those spells. So I want to get into the sorcerer's origins. The first one we're going to talk about is the Draconic bloodline. So the Draconic bloodline is basically the idea that you have a dragon ancestor. And so you have gained some of the power of dragons, and that is fueling your sorcery. Now, I've never thought that the Draconic bloodline was a bad bloodline. There's some good stuff in there, but I do think it could use a bump. It definitely wasn't up to snuff compared to what we saw in other source books. And I think it's an interesting idea, but I didn't get a lot of the feeling of the dragon type you picked either, other than a damage type that you increased. I thought there should be a little bit more than that. Now, the Draconic bloodline could use a sorcery point to get resistance to the associated damage type for a short period of time. But I didn't think that made sense either, because, there's all kinds of races, right in the player's handbook, that can get resistance to damage types that are permanent and they require no resources. So it didn't make sense to me that that would be so expensive for a Draconic bloodline sorcerer. So at first level, as per usual, we're going to choose our dragon type, and it's going to give us an associated damage type. As with the player's handbook version, you can speak, read, and write Draconic. Additionally, whenever you make a charisma roll, when interacting with a dragon, your proficiency bonus is doubled if it applies to the check. But I bumped up Draconic resistance. So as magic flows through your body, it causes physical traits of your dragon ancestors to emerge. At first level, your hit point maximum increases by 1, and increases by 1 again whenever you gain a new level in this class. That's the same as the player's handbook. Additionally, parts of your skin are covered by thin sheen of dragon-like scales. When you aren't wearing armor, your AC equals 13 plus your dexterity modifier. Again, the same as the player's handbook. But I've added in, finally, you gain resistance to the damage type associated with your Draconic ancestry. I see no reason why we shouldn't give the Draconic sorcerer that at first level without requiring sorcery points, and just make it a permanent boost. So then we get into 6th level. Now, technically speaking, because I had made resistance part of the first level ability, elemental affinity became less powerful. So I've given it an additional boost. So starting at 6th level, when you cast a spell that deals damage of the type associated with your Draconic ancestry, you can add your charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of that spell. That's the same as the player's handbook. But what I've added here is, if you cast a spell that deals damage of a type not associated with your Draconic ancestry, you may change the damage type to match your Draconic ancestry. If you do so, you do not add your charisma modifier to the damage roll. So if you want to cast a lightning ball instead of a fireball, and you are a blue dragon sorcerer, you can do so. Just keep in mind, you will not be adding your charisma modifier to that damage roll as you would if you cast a lightning bolt. I think this is appropriate. Again, when you have a particular dragon type and you have an associated type of damage, now what we've done is we've made it so that, there's certain kinds of spells that there's not a lot of options. Lightning is one of them. You don't have a whole lot of lightning options within the player's handbook on the sorcerer spell list. So what it does is it opens up every kind of damaging spell to be a lightning spell, and then that'll fit the flavor of your character. So instead of doing scorching rays, you're doing lightning rays. At 14th level, we're going to keep the dragon wings, so we've kept those, but we're going to make them a little bit better as well. Remember, this is a 14th level ability. We have races in the game that give you permanent flight at level 1 at no cost at all. So what I want to do is just make these wings just a little bit better. And what are dragons really good at? They're good at flying fast. So what I've done is I've doubled the speed. So at 14th level, you gain the ability to sprout a pair of dragon wings from your back, gaining a flying speed equal to double your current speed. So if you have a speed of 30, you now have flight of 60. And finally, our highest level ability here, Draconic Presence. I've kept the flavor of it the same, but I've made an important change to the mechanics. Beginning at 18th level, you can channel the dread presence of your dragon ancestor, causing those around you to become awestruck or frightened. As an action, you can spend 5 sorcery points to draw on this power and exude an aura of awe or fear, your choice, to a distance of 60 feet. For 1 minute, or until you dismiss this ability as a bonus action, each hostile creature that starts its turn in this aura must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or be charmed. If you choose awe or frightened if you choose fear, until the aura ends. A creature that succeeds on its saving throw is immune to your aura for 24 hours. So this is the same as in the player's handbook, except for one very important detail. This no longer requires your concentration. An 18th level Draconic Sorcerer shouldn't have a fear ability similar to a 3rd level spell. We wanted to give this something special. And at 18th level, being able to do fear or charm without using concentration isn't that big a deal. It's not going to break anything, but it makes this ability a whole lot better because we can combine it with other effects that before you couldn't do. So that's it for Draconic Sorcerer. It's just getting a few boosts that you might notice just increase the power of abilities that for the most part it already had. The biggest change really is that they now can cast spells and they can convert them into the damage type associated with their dragon type, which I think makes tons of sense. If I'm playing a white dragon sorcerer, I don't want to cast Fireball. I want to cast a Cold Ball, and now I can do so. Now, the Wild Magic Sorcerer I thought needed some more dramatic changes because the problems with the Wild Magic Sorcerer I think are a little more profound. Again, I don't think the Wild Magic Sorcerer is bad if you have a DM that plays ball, because the Tides of Chaos ability would allow you to get yourself advantage on a roll, and if you used it up, then the DM could give it back to you and have you automatically roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. And if the DM did that every time you use Tides of Chaos, then you could access that table a lot, which is really what we wanted to do. The reason we're playing a Wild Magic Sorcerer isn't because we want advantage on an occasional roll. The reason we want it is we want to roll on the Wild Magic table. That's what we want to do. And I figured that if we're going to make this an effective subclass that's good at every table, that does what the player wants it to do, then we have to take the power of that out of the DM's hands, because I have seen entire campaigns go by where a Wild Magic Sorcerer either never accesses the Wild Magic table or they've accessed it maybe once or twice over the entire campaign. And in the average session, they don't access it at all. So then how does that even feel like playing like a Wild Magic Sorcerer? Because you get advantage on the occasional roll. All kinds of classes and subclasses give you advantage on rolls, so there's nothing special about that. So you ended up playing just this crappy sorcerer that didn't feel wild magic at all. So we needed to make a significant change. Have taken that out of the hands of the DM and put it in the hands of the die. Now the wild magic table itself is just fine. It may have good things happen, it may have bad things happen, and it's completely luck and random, and that's lovely. That's what somebody who wants to play a Wild Magic Sorcerer wants. They want that roll to be a gamble. It doesn't matter that rolling on the Wild Magic Surge table isn't always good. That's what they want. They want that sense of risk involved. They just want it to happen reasonably often. They want it when they cast a spell for it to feel unpredictable. They don't want it to seem safe. And when you roll that d20 and you just never seem to roll a 1, then you lose that feeling. So we've totally revamped that for the Wild Magic Surge. Starting when you choose this origin at first level, your spellcasting can unleash surges of untamed magic. After you cast a sorcerer spell of first level or higher, roll a d6. If you roll a 4 or higher, roll on the Wild Magic Surge table to create a magical effect. If that effect is a spell, it is too wild to be affected by your metamagic, and if it normally requires concentration, it doesn't require concentration in this case. The spell lasts for the full duration. Once you release the surge, the chance of releasing another surge is reduced. Now you consult the Wild Magic Surge table on a roll of 5 or higher. If you produce another surge, afterwards you consult the Wild Magic table only if you roll a 6. So the chance of getting Wild Magic is never less than 1 in 6, and it only goes down after you've already hit that table. So your chance of hitting that Wild Magic table on the average session that you play now is going to be extremely high. But you may not access it a lot, but you likely will access it eventually, because normally you're going to cast 4 or 5 spells. Are you going to roll a 1 to 3, 4 or 5 times? Maybe, but probably not. And the first time you cast a spell, your chance of accessing that table is 50-50. What's more unpredictable than that? Once you complete a long rest, the chance of producing the Wild Magic Surge resets to 4 or higher. So then we get into Tides of Chaos. Starting at first level, you can manipulate the force of chance and chaos to gain advantage on one attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, just like with the player's handbook. Once you do so, roll a d6. If your roll is not 4 or higher, you must finish a short or long rest before you can use this feature again. So we've taken that out of the hands of the Dungeon Master. Now it's random. 50-50 chance you can use it again. Exactly what we want with Wild Magic Sorcerer. We want everything to be unpredictable. Then we get to Bend Luck. Starting at 6th level, you have the ability to twist fate using your Wild Magic. When another creature you can see makes an attack roll, an ability check, or saving throw, you can use your reaction and spend 2 sorcery points to roll a 1d12 and apply the number rolled as a bonus or penalty, your choice, to the creature's roll. You can do so after the creature rolls, but before any effects of the roll occur. It used to be a 1d4. 1d4 is not a big impact. I mean, we can be doing 1d4s with first level spells for entire parties, for entire combats. So if we were going to be spending 2 sorcery points, we're 6th level, I wanted it to be a significant amount. A d12 is a significant amount, but a d12, unlike doing something like a 2d6, is more unpredictable. You have the greater chance of getting 12. You have that chance of still getting 1. Something dramatic may happen, or nothing dramatic may happen. Again, fitting with the idea of the Wild Magic Sorcerer. 14th level, I kept that ability the same. You gain a modicum of control over the surges of your Wild Magic. Whenever you roll on the Wild Magic Surge table, you can roll twice and use either number. Just remember, of course, now we're actually going to be accessing that Wild Magic table probably more often than before. And Spell Bombardment, I kept the same. It was fine before. Beginning at 18th level, the harmful energy of your spells intensifies. When you roll damage for a spell and roll the highest number possible on any of the dice, choose one of those dice, roll it again, and add that roll to the damage. You can use this feature only once per turn. A perfectly serviceable ability, like we would want with a Wild Magic Sorcerer, tends to benefit more when we're using lower, bigger dice than lots of little dice. And I like that too. Again, it fits with the idea of Wild Magic, so I didn't want to change that one at all. And I should mention that the Wild Magic Surge table is unchanged. It's the same as with the player's handbook. So now Wild Magic, it's out of the hands of the DM. We don't have to rely on the DM. Is my DM going to remember to have me cast on the Wild Magic table whenever I use Tides of Chaos? No, we're taking that out of their hands. Wild Magic is going to happen reasonably often, but it's going to be totally random. You absolutely can't count on it happening. You absolutely can't count on it not happening. Every time you cast a spell, there's going to be a reasonable chance it's going to happen. There's going to be a reasonable chance it's not going to happen. And you just never know. And that's the idea of Wild Magic. So that's my fix for the Sorcerer. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Next week we're going to talk about the Warlock and how we're going to make it unique. And we're going to talk about why you might want to take a different subclass than Hexblade every time. So I hope you join me next Friday. Until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everyone. See you next week.